Well, Bob Wallace, welcome back.
Thank you, Jim. Glad to be here.
And we're up for another visit. And today's topic, we're going to talk about something that I think most people have talked about in the last 20 years, and that's political correctness. And it's got a somewhat of a stigma because we're all confused of what really is political correctness. Now, I have the definition here. Now, when you look at the definition, I think what you really draw from that is for one person to say a certain thing's politically correct, and this says it's the avoidance often considered as taken to extremes of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. That's pretty broad.
Yeah, it sounds good. Now the question is, how well do they follow their own definition?
Not very well, because I know people have been called certain terms by many groups of people, but if you answer them in the same tone or the same manner, then you're labeled. You're so far right, you're this, you're a racist, you're these kind of things. And I don't even think they know the definition of what they're calling people to begin with.
Well, one thing I think is important is to realize that there's many voices all crying out at the same time, trying to make their point. There's no unified position. There's no authority. You know, it's a little bit like emojis. I remember when people first sent me emojis, I said, what does this mean?
Oh, I know.
So I tried to look it up, and I found out it means all kinds of things. And I talked with people who were using emojis, and I said, well, how do you know which one to use? So I just use whichever one that looks good to me. So there's like no real standardization. So it's a difficult field to look at. Now, if you read that definition and to somebody and you say, well, I guess that means I can't say Merry Christmas anymore. They would look at you and say, what? What does that definition have to do with Merry Christmas? And that's the problem. It's a nice sounding ideal and a good one, and one that most of us would agree with. The question is, what have they done with this? How have they carried it out?
Well, we had a couple of years ago this firestorm over Dean Martin's song, the Christmas song, talking about, hey, it's cold outside, come in, you know, I'll keep you warm till you go home. And oh, it was such a sexist. You're taking something that was never even intended that way and you're labeling it. And if it's not intended that way, and it's been out for 50 years, this is what's so crazy about it. So I look at people like this, I think they're just egotistical. They want to be, hey, I'm wronging a right. I'm pointing this out. This has been going on for so long, when nobody even had any clue or even thought that way.
Yeah. The basic tool that they've used is they want to be able to control what words mean. One of my favorites of all this is nobody wants to be a racist, really, basically. And no one thinks of themselves basically as a racist. But they've extended the definition of what racism is to include things that we never used to think of as racist. So that way they can make you feel bad about what you're doing because they say, did you know that's racist behavior? Right? And the only reason, the odd thing is, the only reason it works is because you don't want to be a racist. If you wanted to be, if you say, hey, I'm a racist, you don't care what they say. So it's only the person that doesn't want to be a racist that's all of a sudden alarmed that someone's saying they're being a racist. It's kind of ironic how that works.
It is. And I looked up the history of political correctness through the term. It was first used in 1970 in a book, The Black Woman, and 1975 in the United Kingdom, they think, when the modern use really came into being. But still, it's very confusing to people because it's a moving target. Like you say, there's no one or nothing to represent. Okay, here's a list of words that are totally politically incorrect. You shouldn't say them. Mm-hmm. And just because someone gets their feelings hurt doesn't mean that was your intention. Some people are just so sensitive, you can't even say anything around them. Oh, that's terrible for you to say that, that you felt this character shouldn't be that way, or that happened in that movie, or this person did that. All you're doing is pointing out a fact of what happened, but to them, that's offensive.
Right. But if you can control what words mean, if you can control what words are used by people, then they believe you can change people's beliefs and their behavior. That's the real, I think it's not so much the one given example, it's this idea that they can control the words that are used. They can introduce new words that you have to take as having substance. One of my favorite words is microaggressions. I don't know if you've come across that word.
This morning I did.
Yeah. And it means very subtle aggressions against people that are so subtle you can't even see them.
Yeah.
And one of them is what we might have called in the old days faint praise, where you actually see something nice about a group. I can give you one example. Someone said that Asians do well in school. Now, and they said that that was a racist comment. And it was a microaggression. And the idea behind it is that you're saying that, and you know what, I can't even really explain how that they do that. But the point was that the person thought they were saying something nice about them. And they're really not saying anything about Asians. What they're saying is that Asian parents push their kids to do well in school. Now, how that can be a negative thing, I don't really understand.
Well, it's not a negative thing. It's the person who is trying to exert their power over you. And it's all about power. It's all about ego. It's all about the false self of these people who they believe they are and they aren't. But unfortunately, media has fallen in line with them.
Yeah.
And now they promote, that microaggression. I have a newspaper column, the Florida Times Union, this morning. I'll hold that up. Mm-hmm. And it's Leah Michelle apologizes for difficulties on the show Glee. Her co-star was Black, and she apologized because she said it was traumatic microaggression that made me question my career in Hollywood. And this was her co-star, Samantha Marie Ware, saying she said these things to her, microaggressions. They don't say what they were, but she apologized for doing it. And she claimed, it's white privilege, or it's this or that made me say it. Or then it even becomes more pathetic when you apologize and make that kind of statement. To me, you know what? There are only 7 jerks in the world. They just move around a lot. Yeah. That's the way I feel about it.
Well, another great word they've come up with is manplations. It's a fixing of man and explanation. It's a man's explanation of something. And this is when you are being condescending to women by having a simplified explanation of how mechanical things work. Now, I remember back when I was in school, and I had some lady friends that were doing a terrible job doing the maintenance on their cars. And back in those days, they used to have these little Dell books that were teeny, like 20, 30 pages long. I don't know if you remember them. You could buy them for like 50 cents. And there was one called Powder Puff Mechanics. Sure. And it was all about why you should change your oil, why you should check why you should take your car in for servicing, and it was just to make you a good owner. Now today, that would be considered completely offensive. But back then, they thanked me for giving them a simplified explanation so they could be good owners and take good care of their cars.
We used to have powder puff derbies where the girls would race. Justin, my man on the board, the producer just handed me a note, mansplaining.
Did I say it wrong? Yeah, mansplaining. I had too many words in there. See, younger guys, they know all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I
We're
used
too
to
old
think
guys.
LOL was lots of love, and all these guys were sending it to me, and then I found out it was lots of laughs. I don't. So.
Yeah. I thought it was lots of luck.
I don't care. I like to love. But you know, these times are so confusing because there are people who will say something jokingly to someone, being taken out of context. They not only are reprimanded, they lose their job, and they're almost unemployable by anyone else because they've been labeled, you know, whatever, a racist or anything else along those lines. And to overcome that is devastating to them.
One of the things that is part of our Constitution, one of the things that is part of Christianity, is this notion that the punishment should fit the crime.
Yes.
And to lose your career because you say one word, not even in front of the camera, but one word back in the, when you guys are joking around after a show or something, and you lose your entire career over it, it seems unjust.
Well, the N-word always gets the big play. Obviously, it's very detrimental. I never heard it in my household or for any of my relatives, probably until I got out in society. I never knew the word existed. But I've been on the sidelines of a pro football game. Black people call each other that word all the time during the game.
Yeah.
But why is it correct for them to be able to use the word and incorrect or politically incorrect for us to use it? It's a tough, fine line to walk.
Right. Well, I remember when I was young, I lived up north, and there were slang words for virtually every national group that was there.
Oh, sure.
From Italians to Puerto Ricans and all that. And we all generally knew it was better not to say those words. We didn't have any concept of political correctness. We just knew they weren't nice.
Yeah.
And so we really didn't use those words. But if we did, there was not any catastrophic result from doing that. It was just you get the disapproval of the people around you, and that was it.
One of my best friends when I used to work years ago in high school at Pick and Save Drugs was a black fellow. We just hit it off. We hung out together all the time. He'd say, "Why did he get over here?" You know, or I never even thought twice about it because I knew him and I knew the intention of it. It was just slang we were using to call each other. Now the different, are you a racist or are you a realist is the way I look at it.
Well,
One sentence or one word define me as a person, and that's what they're doing.
this has actually gone so far that now, again, this isn't a unified movement. These are just every individuals popping up, schools popping up and saying this or that. They're now saying, or some people are now saying, you shouldn't even use the phrase a white lie. It should be just a lie. And you shouldn't use a word like blacklisted, right? You should say banned. So that even using the words white and black in a completely non-racial way, they're just part of words, is no longer appropriate. So you're right, they've taken something that has merit. I mean, certainly the definition you did, there's merit to those points, but the way they've tried to enforce it and make it happen, I don't think has been very beneficial. And, you know, it's interesting to note that a lot of liberals don't like political correctness because they think it's an ineffective means of communication and doing things. Because think about it, it's actually pretty superficial because there have been many cultures throughout history where there was all sorts of words you couldn't use and there was a very structured manner of speech.
Oh, yeah.
But people, and they would use that, they would follow that, but they didn't, in their minds, they knew the whole thing was wrong and they had their own plans, but they hid behind this language. So just because everybody's made to talk in a certain way does not change how people really feel.
My brother-in-law went to Cuba, went round and about and got in Cuba probably 5 or 6 years ago. And with the guy, they're going to restaurants or going fishing. And he said, the guide said, never ever mention Castro's name when we're eating, when we're fishing. He said, there are people listening everywhere. Is that what we're going to come to? I mean, I ask you, I've got, Justin just passed me something. Jimmy Fallon apologized again for blackface Saturday Night Live sketch, saying, I'm not a racist. He impersonated Chris Rock, who is black, who is a comedian, who is funny. So had on a black face and a beard, and he's impersonating Chris Rock. Now he's come to apologize for it. This was 20 years ago, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we've come to. We see something like that. It was done as a comedy skit. I know comedians who will no longer go to college campuses. You can't say anything. I wonder how Jeff Foxworthy's "You Might Be a Redneck If" would go over today. That's probably okay because you're making fun of white people. I'm serious.
Well, I think I read one time that if you try to tell a joke and you say two guys walk into a bar, you're a sexist because you haven't included a woman. And if you have a man and a woman go in the bar, you're a homophobe. So no matter how you do it, you're wrong.
Yeah, someone is always feeling offended or left out. And I still say people go around not listening to what you say, but trying to take words and phrases to define who you are and then start getting the pitchfork to hang you. And that's exactly, look at politically what you can say and what you can't say. Some get away with it, some don't.
Good.
But no wonder good people don't run for office, Bob.
Just true. You know, one of the things to think about, and this is the thing I always worry about, is that in many ways, these people are utopians. In other words, they're trying to create in their minds an ideal society the way they think things should be. And of course, equality is their big word. They want everybody to be the same. They want economic equality. We've been hearing a lot about income inequality in recent times. And actually, that was part of the utopian movement in England in the 1820s, because they were concerned about the fact that people weren't being paid hardly anything to work in horrible circumstances in the manufacturing factories back in those days. And they wanted to, what they thought was they could separate the fruits of effort from who did them. So in other words, people could make all these things and the society could determine who got them. The trouble was all their experiments in doing this all failed. The one good thing about utopians was they tried to persuade the royals and everybody else that it was in their interest to change. And if they made all these changes, things would be better. And I had forgotten that actually communism didn't start in Russia. It really was, was a Communist Manifesto was done in like 1830 or 1840, it came out, and that was violence. They were going to get what they wanted by violence. And that was Marx's biggest downfall as far as I was concerned, because he figured they'd never give it to you, you had to take it from them. So at least right for the moment, they're following the utopian method of trying to persuade. You and I are pretty much saying that their methods of persuasion are not very effective by trying to change definitions, by trying to create new words. You know, there's always this business of if you can create a noun, you've created a thing that before that never existed. So it's real.
Yeah,
right.
it's reinventing words, it's reinventing phrases. And what you're actually trying to do is reinvent and change an entire culture to think the way you think it should be. Very difficult thing to do. It will fail eventually and fall on its face. And I said this the last show we did. We are all equal in the eyes of God, if you want to say that, but we are not all created equal. You want to talk about income equality? We'll put those people up against the people they claim they're unequal to. Did you finish school? Did you do X, Y, Z? No, no, no. But you still want to be paid the same. This is supposed to be a country of individuals, not of groups of people. That's where the power should be, an individual opportunity to create what you want to create. And if you don't want to create it, that's up to you, but you shouldn't be rewarded at the same level as someone who creates it.
Right. Well, one of the things that tends to go along with this movement is the idea of diversity. And I was reading this interesting thing where someone who was promoting diversity was using the example of Marvel Avengers, the movies. And they were saying that here, all these different people got together, they had different skills, and they were able to defeat their opponents because they worked together. And it was like if you just took one of them, multiplied them by 10, it wouldn't have worked. But you had 10 different people, different points of view. And I thought, there's actually a big flaw in that analogy. And that is every single one of these people were highly skilled and had a lot of power. They weren't just 10 random people put together. They were 10 professionals, so to speak, put together. And that's one of the things that is overlooked. It's not the fact that there was diversity. It was the fact that they had 10 highly skilled, powerful people that got together and figured out a solution.
What's the 80-20 rule? 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And that's usually what it comes down to. And it's true. I've worked in large offices. I've worked on the waterfront. I've worked blue collar, just tremendous labor jobs that were hot, sweaty, and all just thing. But you had a core of people who did a lot of work, and you had your slackers. And that's what, that's what we call them. They were just slackers.
Right. I remember I had one job where a couple people left because they had illnesses, and they were actually left work for a couple months before they came back. And I remembered asking the manager, what has not happened because they've been gone? And he said, nothing.
Yes, and that's the way it is. And I think when you get into guaranteed positions within any institution, especially the government, excuse me, it's hard to get people out of those positions. And we could go on and on down that road with personal examples. So where do we stand? I mean, is there going to be a crossroads? Or are we going to keep going down this path till people feel so constricted and stymied that we actually start losing our place in the world, so to speak? You can't speak out. You're going to offend someone. So it's going to affect all areas of your life, where you travel, what you do, what you say, how you feel at work. Do I bring this up? I've got an idea. Oh, will they be offended by it? I mean, start magnifying that. And, well, is that socialism? Is that communism? Is that Marxism?
Well, you remember what I've told you before. I read this thing one time where it had a whole list of different types of government. We went on and on. And the bottom line was there's only really two kinds of government, or two kinds of people: those that want to tell you what to do and those that don't. And certainly political correctness is very much along the lines of people want to tell you what to do, what to say, what to think, what to feel. Right? I think a good example is the college problem that they've had with speakers coming on the campus.
Absolutely.
Where it's gone beyond just saying, well, we don't think you should have this person, to actual almost rebellion if a speaker is allowed to be there. And one of the problems with people who are sort of absolutists, that their way is the perfect way for everybody, is that when they don't get their way, they have a great tendency towards violence. And that's been the case throughout history. Now, we haven't gone that far, but if this starts to fail, this could trigger into violence. Okay, well, let's go back to the college thing. I was reading a part, this was being written by someone who believes in political correctness, and they were writing about the college one. And what they said was, well, we don't really agree that all these people should be excluded, but there has to be two sides to the story. If something is completely decided, then there's no need to have a debate over it. You can just listen to the point of view that's right. So of course they've taken the matter of choice away from you, so you don't get to decide for yourself which is the right way to go. And they gave the example of Israel versus the Palestinians. And they said, well, that's legitimate because there's two sides of the story there. So we can allow a debate for that. But when it comes to something like climate change, that's settled science. There's no need to have any discussion about that. It's a done deal. And I'm thinking, is that really a done deal? They know everything about it. They know how we're supposed to fix it, how we're going to do responsibility for it, who's going to pay for it. There's so many issues involved in it that it's beyond what any one people or group of people can deal with.
Well, with that mentality, we've seen so many things go down that road. We know what's going to fix it. And then when it starts not to work, it's never abandon that. Let's come up with another game plan. It's just let's keep throwing money and more money at a bad plan to begin with till we finally abandon it, and it's cost a lot of money and energy. But going to the thing on campus, there are a number of speakers who quit going to campuses. They would go in, be ready to speak, and they just constantly shouted down. Now, what about those people who came to the meeting and those people giving the meeting? You're denying them a constitutional right of freedom of speech. And they say, well, we have a right to protest. Well, go protest outside. This is a meeting about, now if it was happening to them, boy, that'd be a firestorm.
Right. You know, there's always the problem of the double standard. If we do it, it's okay. It's an exception to the rule. But when you do it, you're wrong. And unfortunately, that's not unique to the political correctness movement. People do that all the time. It's a human flaw that when they do it, it's okay. When they do it, it's what they deserve. When someone else does it, he stole it. Yeah. That kind of thing.
Well, I mentioned one time, you know, the old phrase we used to use, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Mm-hmm. Basically, when we knew someone was picking on us or whatever, we just, you know, what a jerk, and go on. Or, you know, they'll get theirs one day, you know, they won't last long with that way of thinking or that way of talking. Wasn't really offended about it. Now, if it got really rough, hey, we'd, you know, probably get in a fist fight over it and then go our way. But it was not this ongoing digging in, going after people to destroy them. Not just about this one instance or this one word. It's just seeking out that social justice warrior. I love this term. They claim it's social. They claim they're a warrior, but they forgot about the justice. Where's the justice in what they're doing?
Right. Well, to me, one of the most important things in all this that we've been talking about is that you create a situation where you can't actually talk about the problem. You know, the Soviet Union fell to a large degree because you couldn't talk about problems. You couldn't address it. It was not allowed. You know, it was kind of like the emperor's not wearing any clothes.
Yes.
No one could say anything. You
Yep.
couldn't say, hey, we got a problem. We need to fix it because you're criticizing the party. Right?
That's what I was saying. At an office meeting or a planning meeting, you're in a boardroom and you're scared to say what you feel because you know it's not the comprehensive feeling of everyone there. It's not the consensus. So you're going to stand out. The old Marine saying, do you want to die on that hill? Are you up to it if it doesn't go your way?
Well, I remember reading about airplane crashes in parts of Asia, and they were having a lot of crashes, and they couldn't figure out why they were having the crashes. And they finally discovered, it was difficult for us because it's not part of our culture, that it was considered improper to contradict the captain.
Yes.
So that you could not correct him. They would rather crash and die than to correct the captain and saying you're off course. How can we if we can't communicate with each other, if we can't exchange ideas, because we're afraid that we'll be considered intolerant or offensive, we will become less effective as a nation. And we'll fall into some of the very traps that caused other nations to fail, like the Soviet Union.
I've had people say to me, and in groups of people and all through my life, that, you know, people will say something to you or try to pick a fight, and then afterwards, a friend or two would be with me and said, "Aren't you offended by that?" And I would say, "No, it really doesn't bother me. I don't pay any attention to it." There's another thing: don't lower yourself to their level, that kind of thing. But I've never personally been so firmly attached to the physical body, the looks and possessions and power, all that stuff that really isn't you, but what people think that is their persona, their money, their position, their power. That's what they're trying to protect. They don't even truthfully know who they are spiritually inside. If you were, you couldn't be offended, because all that's just an illusion you've created about who you are. I know that's pretty deep for some people, but that's not who you are. That's just,
Well,
it's like putting on everybody puts on that mask and they go on this masquerade every day of thinking they're this certain thing they are. Well, I'll tell you what, I've never seen a U-Haul at a funeral. You ain't taking any of it with you. So all these things you think you are is ego.
yeah. That's on a more esoteric level. On our everyday level, I'm concerned about censorship.
Yes. Well, we already have it.
Yeah. Well, there's always been some censorship, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But if it gets too far, again, we can't talk about what's really happening. And, you know, if people ever studied the growth and how we came about having free speech, they'd never want to give it up. One of the things that's said that I think is very true, the price of free speech is listening to idiots.
Well,
In other words,
true.
you have to allow people to be idiots, say dumb things, and know that that's the price of having free speech.
One of the
And I don't think the political correctness group has really thought about that, because they have free speech now. If you institutionalize censorship, then there's the fight for who gets to control that, and they could very well lose it. So it could backfire on them, and of course we all would suffer at the same time. So censorship itself is bad all by itself. It's not like, oh yes, we can censor this because it's wrong. We need to be very careful. There's a reason why free speech is the very first amendment to the Bill of Rights, because that's the fundamental part of freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to bring your grievances to the government. That's all based on the freedom of speech.
Well, one of the definitions, or part of the definition I read on political correctness, was if you marginalize someone, well, this is a form of censorship that happens in the media on your 6:30 news every day, because I've always said there are three sides to every story: the right, the left, and the truth. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. So basically, the story you're getting is the one that they believe that you should hear, and they marginalize the truth by not even mentioning the other side.
Yeah.
So how many times have we talked about that? Well, why isn't that reported on? Well, so I didn't know about it. Well, why didn't you know about it? Well, nobody told me. Well, all down the chain of command, they've been told down here, you don't talk about that. So it never gets up there. Oh, no, I didn't hear about it.
Yeah.
A prime example is when Obama was president. He said, you know, if the Republicans have a better health care plan, I haven't seen it. You know why he didn't see it? Because he told the people, never show me any plan the Republicans send. So he wasn't lying. So this is a nice way to manipulate the facts. But we see that all the time. But now it's gotten to the forefront of you're not getting the news on NBC, CBS, ABC, or CNN or Fox or whatever. You're getting that specific viewpoint that's editorialized. They're news readers. They are not reporters anymore.
Well, I mean, we're going into a different area, but I think it's basically true that there used to be hundreds of completely independent newspapers, and now they're all part of some large conglomerate, and they're controlled in the news that they express. So in many ways, the press, which was supposed to protect us, is not protecting us. And one of the things I still like about our country is we can still shame the government into doing the right thing. It's not easy,
Well, yeah,
but it can be done. Now think, if you have censorship and you can't say anything against the government, you can't expose corruption, you can't expose stupidity. And if you do, that's a crime and it puts you in jail. How well is this place going to work? It's not. It's going to fail. Right? If you shut everybody up and you don't listen, you don't get feedback, you're going to fail. And country after country has failed. You know, there's that old saying everybody knows, that the one thing we learn from history is we don't learn from history.
No, we don't.
And sometimes I worry that in all the talk of America's excellence, that we think we don't have to pay attention to the lessons that other people have learned. And I hope we will pay attention to those. But again, we have to be able to talk about these things. We can't be considered un-American if we talk about those things. I mean, you've seen people do that. You know, if you love it or leave it, right? And love it means you accept everything the government says without any saying, are you really sure that's right? Okay. So it's a difficult subject to deal with.
I mean, it's across the board. It's on both sides. I spoke out against the invasion of Iraq. I didn't think it was a thing to do. Well, I have a lot of conservative friends, and they didn't think that was being an American. Our president says we should do that. And, well, you know, it's that blind patriotism. I said, it's another Vietnam. We shouldn't go into Iraq. Afghanistan, the Russians left Afghanistan. Does that tell you something? It's unwinnable. It's corrupt.
All right. So let's assume for a moment that the government takes a look at political correctness and decides that it wants to take over the movement. We're going to be in deep trouble. Yeah, because you know no one owns political correctness.
No, they don't.
Right? There is no.
Did we get the trademark?
Yeah, there's no there's no secretary of political correct. I hope we never have a secretary of political correctness, because then we have, you know how the old story is, if you fight an enemy, you become like that enemy.
Yes.
Well, we'll have been like our enemies if we have a secretary of political correctness at some time. The thought is almost horrifying.
Well, you hit on one of the main reasons that we don't have both sides of the story, because 6 corporations own about every newspaper, television, radio station in this country, and somewhat through syndication or complete ownership. Now, there are channels out there, obviously, especially with what we have now, and we're speaking on right now, the internet, that you can get some of these different viewpoints out without being censored. But even YouTube is censoring people now, what they say is aggressive and, racist or whatever. Again, you're not able to decide that. They're deciding it for you. And that's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with the basic goals of political correctness. It's the degree to which they take them and using it as a way to manipulate and have power over people is what I object to.
Yes.
And I certainly object to me not being able to say Merry Christmas, Jim.
No, well, we'll say Merry Christmas. Well, to kind of move it down the path, we've talked about what it is, some of the dangers of it, the effects of it. And when we did the show on the aliens, you said if you could ask the aliens one thing, it would be to increase our awareness. Well, I'm going to give you 3 books that can increase your awareness if you're interested, Bob. And I know you are. We've read one. It's the 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson's book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you read that book and listen to his story, and follow it through. Yes, it's got some biblical things in it. Don't label it and just finish it. I think that's one of the things you can learn from and get a little step back and take a different perspective. How do you feel about it?
Well, I know for sure if you read him, you will have second thoughts about a gender-free society. 'Cause he points out that male and female has been part of this world for millions of years and has been throughout every culture, every society. And to come along and all of a sudden say, well, there's no longer such a thing as a man. No, there's no longer such thing as a woman. You can be, I think I read, which I couldn't believe, that they actually have 70 different words for gender now that they've created. So I imagine there's all these people just trying to come up with stuff.
But
Just
see,
for the
that's
sake of
political
saying I
correctness.
created that.
That's well, why can't we just respect everyone for what they are? We don't have to label everybody.
Yeah. Well, you're now not allowed to have the word man in any word. Like sportsmanship is a forbidden word now.
Oh, I don't
You're
believe
supposed to say fairness.
fairness.
Yes, you
Well,
can't
that's
say
what we're trying to get,
sportsmanship.
fairness. So I'll be a good sport about it. How about that?
Yeah. And I honestly don't think that if they follow through on the techniques that they're using, that they're going to end up with the result that they want. And the big question is, what are they going to do about the fact that they're not getting the result they want? And we may not like that, what they try to do, because if you're 100% sure you're right, you're really like a fundamentalist zealot about things. And they're great believers in that the ends justify the means. And you and I both know that the means you use affect the ends.
Well, and anytime you become fanatical on any side of any argument, any institution, any religion, and you've crystallized what that organization or thought form or religion is, there's no newness coming in. It's just absolutely dead to me. And you're dangerous then. You're dangerous to yourself, and you're also dangerous to other people, because you believe that even if you killed them, you were justified for killing them. We see it all over the world today.
Yeah. I've been watching this TV show called Limitless. And it's a story about a guy that takes a drug that makes 100% of his brain. And it'd be instructive to people to listen to the conversations where he talks with the guy that gives him or gives him the immunity to the side effects of the drug, because he does all these really bad things to people, kills people, ruins people, but it's all for the sake of a greater good. So it's all
Always for the sake of the greater good.
Yeah. So it's almost like when someone starts talking about sacrificing you for the greater good, it's time to exit stage left.
I agree.
Okay.
And speaking of increased awareness, as we're wrapping this up, I have 2 books I want to recommend, and we'll put links to all the books the 3 books I've talked about. Ramana Maharishi, and it's called Be As You Are by David Goodman. I'll hold that one up, and we'll put some links to that. And this other book, it's called I Am That. And what you can do also is go to YouTube, put these philosophers' name in, and they actually have readings up there, and you can listen to parts of the book, which I do almost every day. Well, you talked about increasing your awareness. To find out who you truthfully are, just ask yourself, who am I? Truthfully, who am I? And when you find out you're not the self you believe you are, the external self, then your individual strength and power grows. And all these things we're talking about, it's the rising tide raises all ships. You increase your awareness, it raises everyone. So that's a little off the path we're talking about, but if you want a solution to being so offended, find out why you're offended. and find out who is really being offended. Is it really you? Are you being offended, Bob?
Well, I told you, sometimes I'm annoyed by political correctness, and sometimes I think it's highly amusing.
It is amusing because it's a moving target. If we had a laser, it'd be hard to hit all the time, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Enjoyed it today.
Okay.
Check in later, and we'll
See you
see
next
you
week.
next time on Hacking the Truth.